Okay, we have Dylan Patel, a Northeast Regional Coordinator for the Green Communities program at the Department of Energy Resources. He previously worked on the environmental justice strategy on behalf of UMass Lowell, the City of Lowell, National Grid, and the Environmental Defense Fund for the city's network geothermal project. Next is Cynthia Ahrens, began her climate advocacy work 5 years ago. She is a chair of the Sustainable Lexington Committee and has spent the last years focused on building electrification. Along with the Clean Heat Lexington Alliance, she has passed 2 Lexington bylaws on electrification and is an advisor for residents in other communities. Interested to see what her experience in Lexington has been. And finally, Nick Chrisman is a chair-elect of the Weston Sustainability Committee. He advises climate-focused startups and has now done research for Harvard Business School in the climate venture capital space. Over the last 18 months, he has been testing home electrification on his own house, mostly with positive results. So we're going to start with Dylan. That will give us a background, move to Lexington, and then end up with Weston to hopefully by the end of this session, better understand what these efficiency building codes are all about and why they should be of interest to all of us. So Dylan.
Thank you so much, Joel. And thank you, everybody. Welcome this evening. And thank you for your patience while all of us were trying to figure out the door to the stage, so to speak. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen on the municipal opt-in specialized code. Hopefully you can all see it. Can I get a thumbs up? Yep, thank you. So I'm going to present a policy overview of why we have the specialized code and what it generally means for communities. And then I'm going to pass it on to Cindy to talk about her experience in Lexington. So just to give a little bit of context, we begin with the Global Warming Solutions Act that was passed in 2008. That kind of set the stage for the Green Communities program. And it also was one of the first state laws in the country to commit Massachusetts to reducing its greenhouse gas emissions relative to a baseline. Since then, we've been hearing a lot about the progress the state has made, but we've also been hearing a lot especially in the last few years, about the accelerating rate of climate change, the urgency to do much more on a global scale, and also on a local scale. So that's why one of the reasons why the Climate Act was passed in 2021. It provides a legal mandate for the state to completely achieve net zero emissions by 2050 with interim targets for the decades preceding. The Climate Act also provides the legal basis for the specialized opt-in code, and it tasks the Department of Energy Resources to develop those regulations, which we do in collaboration with the Board of Building Regulation and Standards. So as you're probably aware, renewables are becoming a much bigger phenomenon for the grid. And so we're seeing a lot of decarbonization of the grid. We're also seeing a lot more electric cars. And so it seems that the grid, electricity and transport are pretty much the low-hanging fruit when it comes to decarbonization. The building sector is much, much tougher just because we're dealing with a lot of existing building stocks, a lot of long-lived assets that are very difficult to change. However, by 2050, we're expecting that about a quarter of the buildings that will be built by then will be new. And so these are relatively easy to make extremely energy efficient. And this is why we're targeting these kind of new buildings so that the incremental or the marginal carbon emissions from this enhanced building stock is as low as possible. And so as you can see on the screen, it's actually very easy to make new buildings net zero compliant or low emissions compliant relative to a existing building. And we're also expecting that by having these more rigorous standards, it will spur a new market for existing retrofits. We're seeing quite rightly a lot of worry about inflation, about supply chain issues, about a shortage of labor, but these are really short-term problems, and the market will respond in turn to the increased demand of these energy-efficient homes. And so one of the reasons why we're kind of targeting buildings, and especially like the energy consumption of buildings, is that, like I mentioned before, we're really expecting the grid to decarbonize a lot by 2050. So currently there is quite a high carbon intensity of electricity generation in the state, so much so that electric resistance heating, which I actually have in my fairly old apartment, is actually much more emissions. It produces a lot more emissions per unit of heat than actually fossil fuels, because electric resistance heating just uses a lot of electricity. However, heat pumps today are so efficient that they produce about half of the emissions that you would have with gas heating. But if we're going to fast forward onto 2050, the emissions factor for electricity generation is slashed by a third. And so that means that electric resistance heating uses about half of, or generates about half the emissions relative to gas heating. And you'll see that either air source heat pumps or ground source heat pumps produce a very negligible amount of carbon emissions to achieve the same amount of heating. And so on top of the kind of spur of the policy that we have for the specialized stretch code, the green communities, excuse me, the green communities recently announced the Climate Leaders Program. This is a supplement to what we have for the green communities. And the green communities is not going to go away. We're just announcing, we announced this mid-October. We're announcing the climate leaders as this next generation of municipalities that want to have access to enhanced funding opportunities. And those that have really gotten a lot of mileage out of green communities and want to be, to kind of, spin the words, leaders in this new generation of the commitment to achieve a green economy. And so one of the criteria to be a climate leader is to adopt the specialized stretch code. There will be more details regarding the climate leaders in the new year, but right now this is as much as I can present at the moment. So I've kind of talked a lot about the policy and like what it means, but I haven't really told you what the specialized stretch code is. So it's essentially an addition to the existing stretch code, which a lot of, or the vast majority of municipalities in the state have already adopted. The specialized stretch code, and I'll get to this in the next slide, is essentially a few enhancements to what you have already in the stretch code. And as I think Joel had mentioned earlier, 25 municipalities so far have adopted this. And we have votes for several others in the state in the coming weeks. So that number could really bump up by the new year. And so just to give a little taste about what the specialized stretch code means for residential low-rise buildings, it is essentially requiring mixed fuel homes to have solar PV to offset those emissions from having some kind of glass appliances, and then wiring for electrification. And the reason why we're kind of requiring pre-wiring for mixed fuel homes is for consumer protection, and Nick will talk about this later. It's to ensure that a future occupant of the home, or in case you might want to change to all electric in the future, you have that pre-wiring already installed. And so it will save you money, or it will save the future occupant money from converting, because it's much easier to do that as it's being constructed than it is to do it as a retrofit. And so this makes your home a lot more sellable if you were to put it on the market. And just to give a little bit of explanation about hers, what hers is, that's the home energy rating system. And it basically is a, you can think of it as like a miles per gallon. It's a reference system for what a home's energy consumption should be. And it uses basically a reference home of 100. An existing home is like, an existing 20th century home is roughly 140, so it would use like 40% more energy than a spec home. New houses in Massachusetts are roughly at has 50, 52, so it uses about half the amount of energy as this kind of reference home. So, for an all-electric house, you're using about 45, it's a 65% reduction, has 45. For a mixed fuel home, we're expecting 68% reduction, has 42. So for the stretch code. And so just for the specialized stretch code, there are no additional efficiency requirements. We're just requiring solar PV and pre-wiring for mixed fuel homes. And so my last slide is on incentives. So with Mass Save, for the vast majority of municipalities in the state that are served by investor-owned utility, there are quite large Mass Save rebates for single-family units, for multifamily units, and for commercial buildings, for different kinds of appliance upgrades and for installation. And there are also several towns served by municipal light plants that offer similar incentives. And we also have, thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act, quite high tax credits for efficiency improvements, also for single-family homes and for commercial and multifamily homes. And you can also access, there's a really good website called Rewiring America that provides a whole litany of incentives that are provided. So that's it from my side. I'm happy to answer questions at the end, but right now I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand it over to Cindy and her experience in Lexington.
Thank you so much, Dylan. You did a great job at that. Hopefully you can all see my screen. Yes, wonderful. I've only got a couple of slides here, and again, I'd be happy to answer questions at the end. And I also wanted to, thanks for being invited tonight, and I wanted to pass on good wishes from Lexington's Sustainability and Resilience Officer, Maggie Peard. I worked very closely, she was the lead on this actually here in Lexington, but she couldn't be with us tonight. So what happened in Lexington? Well, I'm just going to start with the great news. We passed the specialized code in March of this year with an overwhelmingly positive vote. Just lots and lots of support. We've got our approval, because we're a town, we got our approval for our for the changes so that we can adopt the specialized code by the Attorney General's office this September, and our effective date is January 1st. We're very, very, very close to that and very, very excited about it. As Dylan mentioned earlier, many other communities have adopted this already, and it is growing. We are expecting a lot more to happen. So there we go. I just wanted to talk, I mean, Dylan sort of referenced these a bit, but I think some of the most important reasons to adopt the specialized code, which is a very sort of simple but very important layer on top of the stretch code, is this idea that that we should really help consumers and help the residents, the people who are going to inhabit this new construction. So I'm sure many of you have been talking about, the housing crisis that we have here in Massachusetts, and we need lots more multifamily housing. And so one of the really, really good pieces of the specialized code is for large multifamily housing, requiring passive house as a standard for large multifamily housing. And it's being used more and more. People are really getting good at it, and especially for affordable housing, which is great, because what this does is it makes for a healthier building. It makes for a more comfortable building, lower cost to run, over time, life cycle costs, and more resilient building. There's one passive house building that is planned, hasn't broken ground yet. Affordable housing, 23 units in I forget, somewhere in Boston. I don't remember where, but this multifamily, these apartments are going to be so resilient that they expect to keep comfortable temperature with a power outage for 5 days. 5 days of no power. And yeah, you're probably going to have to put it, a couple sweatshirts on or whatever, but we're not talking about, we're talking about maintaining people's health and safety. So this is really, really great step forward for multifamily housing. And as Dylan mentioned, there are lots of rebates for passive house. And then the other thing that he mentioned before is consumer protection. So when we do have new construction that's happening with some fossil fuels, to do the preparation for electrification, it's the simplest, the easiest, the lowest cost at time of construction, as opposed to requiring the resident in the future to electrify. And the requirement of solar really helps offset the utility costs. So those, I think, are the most important things to consider when considering adopting the very simple specialized code. One thing that Nick and others were asking is like, well, what were the concerns and how do you address them? Like what did the community want to know about adopting the specialized code? Again, we refer to these, but it's good to review these. Homeowners, like, does this apply to me? Do I have to worry about it? No, this only applies to new construction. So it wouldn't apply to any renovations or additions. And then on the other side, I had mentioned for large multifamily, people who are building single family, 2-family, 3-family, or small multifamily developments were like, what's this passive house thing? I've never heard of it. Do I have to, worry about it? And it's like, no, it's only for large multifamily. And as I mentioned previously, there's lots and more and more developers, builders of large multifamily are doing passive house and really having great successes with it. So that's, I guess, one other thing actually that I forgot, it's here in what our next steps for Lexington is, but our sustainability and resilience officer, our sustainability director, worked closely with the building commissioner and their staff to really look at the specialized code and realize that, this is not a big add-on to what building commissioners will have to do. The specialized code is pretty simple. The building commissioner and his staff want to learn about passive house, but the good thing is that and I'm sure they will learn, but by needing to have this the certification, it's sort of there for you. So there's not too much that the building commissioners or building professionals, inspectors will have to do. And so the next steps that our sustainability director and our building commissioner are going to be planning to talk to, do some more outreach and talk to developers and builders so that they're prepared for when this comes. And we're really excited to be doing that, and we're really excited for this to be able to become a reality in Lexington and in so many other municipalities. That's why I was very excited to come tonight, because we think it's really an easy step, an important step, and something that all of Massachusetts can do. So thank you for that. And Nick, I guess you're up.
I'm up. I'm up. Thank you, Cindy. Wonderful presentation. And boy, that 154-3 vote, you must have done a really nice job at town meeting, or had a good rabbit's foot or something like that I might have to borrow. All right. Bringing in the home leg, I think you've heard a lot about what the code is and why it was created from Dylan, and Cindy gave a lot of the good reasons. Personally, I'm in the, I'm in the thick right now of speaking to builders and developers in Weston. I've been around to about 6 or 7 different town committees and forums, and I've spoken to a lot of residents. And what I thought I would just do as we're coming towards a vote for Weston, we'll have that at the specialized town meeting on November 28th, is share for any Weston residents out there, some of the reasons a lot of folks I've spoken to have been really excited about this, and some of the questions that have come up specifically in Weston, where we've tracked down answers, thanks in many cases to Dylan or other builders and architects that are helping us try to make this come forward. So why do we think it's a good idea for Weston? Because all electric homes are the best homes. They're the way that the top quality custom homes get built in Weston already. They're comfortable, healthy environments, and the cost is, especially after incentives, usually equal or less than building the other way. Second thing is, we think that's great, but adopting the specialized code preserves choice. So if you love gas stoves or really feel you need as a builder to put in a gas furnace, that choice is preserved with some good offsets that Cindy mentioned, and with protection from a costly retrofit sometime in the future. So we think it's a good way to begin the transition. Third is it's essential for decarbonization in Weston. 68% of our emissions come from buildings. And if we don't take a step on that, we won't be able to meet the goals of our climate plan. The fourth reason is that it's a standard bylaw. We're taking 100% standard language from Massachusetts and all the surrounding communities. So it's perfectly consistent for builders, perfectly consistent for us. And then the last point, opens us up for grant eligibility, like Dylan mentioned, in climate leaders. The funding from green communities previously and climate leaders in the future is one of the top sources that we use here in Weston to go get energy efficiency projects done around town with minimum burden for taxpayers. So I'll speak a little bit more to the detail behind each of these, and then some of the questions that have come up, and then pass it over to everyone in the audience for any questions you have. All right, so all electric homes, better, healthier, cheaper. It sounds impossible that you could get all three, but all indications are there that you do. First is, we've spoken to a number of builders and architects. That's a picture from Catalano Architects of a home built in Weston that's compliant to code and is absolutely gorgeous. And they put in all the all electric. They sealed it right. They did heat pumps. They did it all electric, and it's coming out wonderfully. The second big point is one of the ways that the builders and architects are talking to homeowners who are building like this about this choice is they're starting to speak to the comfort from a normally regulated indoor environment run by a heat pump with strong insulation and weatherization, and the benefits of moving away from gas appliances in the home. The Rocky Mountain Institute in a study said that children growing up in a grass home have a 42% higher risk of asthma and other lung diseases than those that do not. And I think that's just one of many statistics related to gas inside the home that drives Massachusetts' move away from that, like we moved away from asbestos and lead paint and other such things in the past. And then finally, I think there's, when we look at upfront costs, DOER has studied and seen that for single family homes, after rebates, it costs less to build. Some of our experience, we've spoken to builders and architects in Weston, suggests it's very close. It could go either way. What's indisputable is that the cost to operate the home is enormously lower. The range that ThoughtForms Builders, who builds in Weston, gave us was 60 to 100 plus. And I said, well, what does 100 plus mean? And that means that in a number of cases, the solar offset is so great that Eversource pays the homeowner rather than the other way around. So I'm pretty convinced that on all these dimensions, these all electric homes are certainly, there's a good reason why Massachusetts is pushing in that direction, because the technology's there and it's the best. Now, that's a choice. I think that the goal is for many people to make that choice, but to have a choice. And if you prefer gas, you're allowed to do that under the specialized code. I think that the way I read the Climate Act and the direction of legislation, all electric pilots, is that there's likely to be restrictions or possibly bans on fossil fuels in the future in Massachusetts. and pre-wiring eases the cost when somebody has to deal with that, the homeowner or somebody else. You have the plug where you need it, you have the capacity on your panel, and you can make that switch in a relatively easy manner. The next reason to move in this direction relates to Weston's plan to reach net zero by 2050. And this was a plan built in collaboration across the community in 2021. And when we studied our emissions, and the number one source is around buildings, 68%. And in the plan anticipated as a result of the Climate Act, building codes would be revisited, and states that we have to adopt more progressive building codes if we're to meet our goals around decarbonization in Weston. And so, it's a good way to start now. About 20 new homes are built each year. We can start having an impact on those, and that impact over 20 or 25 years will grow considerably. Just a little note that I learned through this is on transportation, our second biggest bucket. Weston's #1 in Massachusetts for the percentage of residents who own an electric vehicle. So I think it's a good indication that when the chance to make an investment that's smart for the climate and smart for the resident presents itself, people are taking that. Fourth reason is we will be, by adopting the specialized code, we'll be consistent to the surrounding communities. When we look at a map right around Weston, those communities that have adopted the specialized code, we're sort of a donut hole in the middle there. And I think it's a good indication of what our neighbors are doing, #1. All the builders and developers who work in Weston, they also work in other communities that have already adopted this, so they're getting used to it. And I would say, thirdly, we don't want large fossil fuel driven homes built in Weston, because those home values will not hold up over time. And we want we want the property values of all of our homes and all of those around us to stay strong and have the right sorts of homes built in Weston. And then I think the last reason we talked about standard by law, prerequisite to climate leaders funding, which will start us down the right path, consistent to other communities, and allow us to keep taking steps over time to reduce taxpayer burden, to get moving in a direction that decarbonizes in a smart way. So as we've gone around, there's definitely been a litany of questions that have come up because building codes encompass a lot of new technology and a lot of policy and a lot of different things. But a few of the biggest ones that I've heard, one is about, okay, so in a mixed fuel home, there's a rooftop solar requirement. Will I have to cut down trees? Does that make any sense? And the answer is no. There's an exemption where solar access is below 70% as a result of trees that exist, or if the roof is too steep. So in that case, you're exempt from that solar requirement if it doesn't make sense on the property. Will the grid be ready? Massive investments in the grid are being made, #1. #2, and there's been some really good research also from DOER here, all electric and code compliant homes actually have lower peak heating loads than even gas heating homes. So there actually is not expected to be a strain on the grid from this code, though Eversource and others are getting out ahead of it anyway, because they know that more electric vehicles and over time will expand our needs. What about backup power? Trees fall down in Weston and knock out our power lines. And I think that, as Cindy mentioned, these homes retain heat for a long time anyway, but the code allows you to have fossil fuel backup generators if you would like and still meet the definition of an all-electric home. So I think in many ways, these are good examples where this code is well defined. I think the FAQ document, Dylan, is 25 pages or something like that. It's well thought out, it's well defined, it's common sense in a lot of places where it ought to be. And I think it's another way that makes it relatively easy to step up to this policy that the state's proposing. So in summary, I think it's consumer protection now. Buildings last 50 to 100 years. And so we want those to be high quality, green, and without need for retrofits. It's a good standard bylaw, prerequisite for funding, avoids adverse development. And it's the #1 way we can make an impact on our emissions in Weston. And so I hope we will go ahead and adopt it and join those other communities in taking a step forward. And if you are a Weston resident, please come. Our Weston special town meeting is at 7 o'clock on Tuesday, November 28th at the high school. And we would really appreciate support to go out and take this step. I know Wayland is also coming up for a vote in the spring, so I thought I would put that as well because we want everybody to move in this direction because it's good for all of us. So I'll end there and pass it back over to Joel to moderate some questions in. And thank you for listening and thank you for your time. Joel, you're muted.
Sorry, my guess is you're hoping at the Western Town Meeting for the same sort of results that Cindy got in Lexington.
Joel, I'm hoping for a majority, and I'll take it any which way, though. Cindy's vote was a thing of beauty.
Okay. First of all, administrative question for you three. There was a question about the slides. Would they be available? Are you open to sharing your slides?
Happy to.
Okay. Then we'll work out some way to get them on our website. This is being recorded, so you can watch the whole thing again too. But good, we'll try to see making the slides available. Also, one just definitional that you all mentioned buildings and multifamily, and just want to make sure we understand what is meant by building. Is that also schools? Is that also a warehouse? Is that also a factory? You know, what's a building?
All of them.
Yeah, so the specialized stretch code impacts all kinds of buildings, as Nick said. I included information on low-rise residential just because that's the most common type. But it also affects commercial and commercial, municipal, and high-rise buildings, but in a very similar way to low-rise. So if you're going electric, if you're building electric anyway, for any of those buildings, then there are no additional requirements. But if you're building a mixed fuel building, then there will be requirements for electrification and for solar PV, or you can go the passive house route. But basically, it's pretty much the same kind of, or very similar kind of treatment.
Okay, thank you. You all mentioned the grid, and there's clearly some skepticism out there about, oh, the grid will handle it, or, you know, it's going to be more efficient. A couple of questions come in here. One about nuclear. You know, what is the plan to bring nuclear on? I realize that may be a little outside of this particular discussion here about building codes, but I think people are concerned about, am I just going to I go electric, but I'm still burning gas remotely in a electric power plant. So what's the big deal? So how do you respond to that? I know, Nick, you talked a little bit about efficiencies that you hope through electrification.
Joel, could you maybe rephrase that? I thought the question started out about like, well, if the grid today is powered by sources that are not so green, will it in fact reduce emissions, which I think is a very valid concern. And Dylan, underlying your grid from 2020 to 2050, I think is a state plan to green the grid. And I don't know if I know the details of that. Was there a second part, Joel, about like reducing total?
You hit it. That's,
Yeah.
I think, what people are asking about. I mean, the second part is about nuclear power. You know, there's no new plants on the horizon, as I understand it, in New England, but it also comes up, Dylan, with your chart showing that in 2050, the electrical solutions will be that much more efficient. The assumption there is what?
So we're going to see a lot more deployment of renewables, including offshore wind, solar. This also because of the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act. There's going to be a lot more incentives for utilities to build renewable energy, as well as for private citizens for rooftop solar. We're also seeing a lot more investment into grid resiliency, which will be much thoroughly needed for these renewables, as well as storage capacity. And there's also, I think, as the person who mentioned nuclear, we can expect, you know, some kind, as we do already, some kind of imports from Canada, which is heavily hydro and nuclear based. You know, and there's also room or time for additional capacity of that sort to be built in ISO New England. I just can't predict that.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think, Dylan.
Can I just add in, sorry, that in terms of, grid, can the grid handle it? And I think, I don't remember Dylan or Nick, one of you mentioned this, but we are actually, our grid is summer peaking, right? We use the absolute most energy, right, electricity right now in the summer when it's really hot. And the forecast, sort of the plans for ICE in New England, and this is our local grid, is we even with the planned electrification, charging, EV, the adoption of EV, electric vehicles, that we won't become, our area will not become winter peaking until something like 2035. Like, so we still got a lot of runway. Nick is right. Utilities are making plans to be prepared, but we do have a lot of leeway in there, and none of that basically, in terms of adopting the specialized code, none of that you have to worry about. You can still you have a lot of choice, like Nick said, and it's really quite simple. So I just wanted to make those points.
Okay.
Well said, Cindy.
Thank you. Another question is, what if I have that big tree, or for some reason I can't do solar, or maybe geothermal? Let's extend the question. Ross is wondering, what are my alternatives? Is there some sort of community solutions that I could opt into? Neighborhood solutions, maybe.
Well, certainly, if the new construction is all electric, as Dylan said, you don't have to put any solar. You're absolutely you absolutely can put solar on. It would be even better, right? You can offset the electricity costs, which you can't offset if you build it. There's no way to reduce your fossil fuel costs by putting solar panels or doing anything. So if you build all electric, you don't have to put solar as part of the specialized code. But if you do, you can offset it. I mean, the idea that the way the specialized code is written, there, as was mentioned, there are exceptions for sort of shading, and if there's not enough area on the rooftop for solar. So there's a lot of there's a lot of it's the specialized code is great. It pushes us forward, but it's also very understanding, right?
Yeah.
And very of where we're going.
Yeah. I think this question may actually go beyond the specialized code here, just saying, I'm a homeowner, I live in an old house or whatever, I just want to have a more efficient house. Is there a way I can make this happen for me?
I think maybe my quick answer would be that yes, retrofits are outside of this code discussion. I think communities, I don't think there's official community solar at the minute in Weston, but there are community solar projects beyond that you can join. I think NextAmp is a company, for instance, that does it. And network geothermal is a super cool idea, very prevalent in Sweden, where more than 50% of homes have geothermal heating at this point. And there's a pilot in Framingham. They converted some gas infrastructure into network geothermal, and they're testing that out close to here because it could work really well. But I don't know. I think that's a first of kind in Massachusetts pilot, and so I don't know that we can say, hey, that's going to be showing up in our communities very soon. Though that would be exciting.
Yeah.
So you can also participate in the rec market just by purchasing green power through Green Energy Consumers Alliance and groups like that as you're retrofitting your home. If you can't afford or it's unfeasible to do solar on your property. Hey, I have a question for Dylan that was hinted at, I think, by Nick. I noticed that you said 25 communities have so far approved the stretch code. So how many communities have actually become a climate leader or have received that designation?
So 25 communities have adopted the specialized stretch code. The Climate Leaders Program was recently announced in mid-October. We've released expression of interest for municipalities that are interested in having their municipal decarbonization plan, which is one of the other criteria. However, there are no climate leaders at the moment because it is a new program and we're expected to roll it out much further in the new year. Right now, it's still in semi-development.
And do you anticipate there to be an application process similar to the one that was followed for the green communities after that was
Yes.
passed in 2008?
Yes, exactly. So communities that have fulfilled those 5 criteria will be eligible. We're going to have like a designation round for the climate leaders. However, I cannot give a time frame at this moment.
And is the funding for this all coming from RGGI, just like it did for the Green Communities Act? Are the funds allocated for this from the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative and the revenue generated from that?
I cannot answer that at this moment. I would have to ask.
The reason I ask is
would
because
have
I
to-
remember with the green communities, the towns that applied early, because I was in a town that did, the incentives and grants were significant and sizable. And so there's some added incentive to get in the queue early, if you will, with respect to becoming eligible for grants and different funding for your specific town. And that's another reason that Weston, I would think, might have a genuine interest in becoming the 26th town or 27th, whatever the schedule might be. Just because I do know that we are relying on funding from the green communities for some of what we have already done. And Nick, you could probably speak to that being on the sustainability committee. And that's just
right.
a point here.
That's right. It's probably been one of our largest sources of funding from the state, and it's helped with some meaningful projects. So we are, it will help us a lot to be a part of the climate leaders.
Both Cindy and Nick, you mentioned builders and talking with builders. What's the reaction that you've received from builders?
Well, we have, sorry, Nick, I'm going to jump in really, just briefly. We have builders that are already doing it. So in terms of already building new all electric homes. So for them, the adoption of the specialized code is a no up. It doesn't affect them at all. I think that there are, I think those that might be expressing concern, it's mostly just because of inertia, right? There's a lot of builders will have this is my pro forma, this is how I do things, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And if that pro forma being like sort of how do they put it together? What are they spending on what? What are they gonna sell this house for? If that doesn't include all electric, then they will have to think about it a little differently with a specialized code. And it's really it's the inertia, it's the cost to change direction just slightly, right? And so I think that's what is causing some concern. And I was not involved years ago, when the stretch code was introduced in the state. There was also, again, a lot of consternation and concern. And I think that with training, with talking about it, we can get through it. So I think it's more people who haven't really looked at the details, haven't looked at how simple this is, and are just concerned about an unknown. But when you really look at it, at the end of the day, it really makes sense for the future residents of those homes, and potentially, for as Nick mentioned, home values, right?
Yeah, maybe just one little thing I'd say, Cynthia, and I think I see a couple questions slanting this direction in the chat. I'd say by and large, I hear what you hear. And then I think the only second thing that I heard in the builder and developer session is that occasionally a new project is in an area where the grid needs they need a new transformer and they need new poles to go with that, and they have to do quite a bit of work. And there's a bigger, on one particular project, there could be a bigger premium. And I think there's good research from Built Environment Plus of larger buildings built in Massachusetts. There's been 32 million square feet of net zero ready buildings built recently. 81% of those projects had a 1% or less. This is multifamily, municipal, commercial, had a 1% or less cost premium where they had cost data. So in general, you don't hit much. But outside of that, there could be a cost premium. One developer said it costs about 30 grand additional to do some of the transformer and do the poles on a Wellesley project. So that one might have swung. I don't know if that 30 grand was likely outside of 1%, but the occasional project can hit some of that. And I would say the developers and builders' legitimate argument is we're bearing the cost of making this transition in certain cases. And I can't argue against that. In some certain projects, they hit it and they have to do some work. Now, I think that most of the home sales in the region are probably not driven primarily by building costs and are able to make that up. But that does happen a little bit. I think that would be an earnest answer to some of the questions I saw there in the chat.
Yeah, there's one comment here about the interconnection queue, that there's a delay. Once you set up your solar system, you can often have to wait months for the interconnection on the utility side. That's a legitimate concern, and you're going to have to find ways to speed that up. That I suspect will improve as the utilities continue to upgrade their various substations and the equipment related to electrified electrified communities and towns. But that's a legitimate concern.
Yeah, but if I can add to that, Jeff, and I think it's related. I think I saw another question about how many buildings are we talking about that this affects, right? Lexington has about 11,000 households, 11,000 homes, and we're talking about on the order of 80 or so new residents, new single family homes per year. So it's a pretty small number when you're looking at the size of Lexington. We certainly hope for some new multifamily to be happening soon in Lexington, but there's nothing nothing there yet. So what we have to look at from historically is about 80 or so new single family homes per year, and a handful, not even like one or so every couple of years of new. We've got some new life science buildings here in town, but really for the life science buildings, they've already been sort of building towards what the specialized code would require. They were already expecting to put solar on their building to do these kinds of things. So it's on the larger commercial side, at least from Lexington, the builders and the developers were sort of expecting this, and I think they did. They said this because they want to attract the best life science companies, and large companies like that are starting to look at, well, what kind of, what's the energy use of this building? What's the, what does that mean for long term?
Good point. I will just say, I mean, there's some questions about how this might affect multi-housing development in Weston, and it would be nice to actually have that problem.
Right. Yeah, so talked about 2050 and ambitious goals of being net zero. A couple of questions about that. Do you see in your communities here that trying to get to that point of 2050, that there's certain tracks that we're taking that looking pretty good, pretty healthy, but yet on other initiatives, other tracks, other opportunities look more difficult to you in getting to net zero? That we're going to miss it. And that was what I'm saying. Is there certain things you see as sustainability committee members where we may not make the targets?
Well, there's I forget who was that, somebody I was talking to, or maybe it was here. No, it was earlier. It was another webinar I was on earlier today. We know that we need to do more, and we know that there's, that it's a really, we need to do more than we're doing now, and we know it's a really high bar. But the really good thing about this is that we know what we need to do now, and we know I mean, I'm amazed at, in the last 5-10 years, how much heating technology has come, water heating technology has come, building insulation, all sorts of advancements that we've had that truly lower the cost of or greatly lower the energy use that we have. So I expect that we don't know what we don't know yet. We don't know what great developments are out there. We certainly shouldn't stop and say, well, let's just wait till some great thing comes along. I think you have to do, it's a yes and, we have to do all of the above. We don't have all the answers, but I think there's a lot of reasons to really to push ourselves, but be very, very hopeful about it, and very, positive about this transition.
Nick, are you hopeful? Equally hopeful?
I am hopeful. I think if I were to answer your question, Joel, and it doesn't pertain to this code, I think the biggest challenge in Weston will be the existing buildings, municipal, commercial, and homes. And that's not at least at the moment, is not a code, is not influenced by code so much as it's, I think, influenced by great technologies for the home that people are excited to go and adopt, and given good incentive by the governments to do it. I'm really encouraged by the policy and the quality of options. But that's a lot of, that involves a lot of personal choices or town choices. And there's a lot of education and a lot to go in that. But I am very hopeful.
I think in a way that triggered my question too is you were, Nick, saying about 20 homes a year, and Cindy, I think you said 80 homes in Lexington out of 11,000. Weston has 4,000. Someone may ask, well, are we going to move the needle here? But clearly, if you had another town meeting where you had a code where all retrofitting all current houses, it would probably not pass, right? Or it would be much more difficult to set codes for that.
I would just say, Joel, that's not homes. Yeah, I was going to say homes are unique, so I don't think that it can't. Existing buildings and homes are very unique, and so a blanket policy is much harder to be practical and workable. And I think the quality of the current option on the table is that it is very workable and doable and is being done because you're starting with new construction. So I just draw a very big contrast between those two.
And of course, in 50 years, that new construction will be old buildings, but you've future-proofed it, I guess, hopefully.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So how many new houses in Weston are being built on average each year? Nick, did you say 20?
I think Nick said 20.
Yes.
Now that's just houses. Presumably there's other buildings like fire stations maybe, and et cetera. So another class of sort of question that comes up periodically is, this is all great, but are these rich people solutions? Is this solutions for communities like Lexington and Weston? I mean, we're number one, as you said, Nick, in EVs, and that's because maybe people have the money to buy Teslas. So the question, how do you answer that question? That is this for everybody, or is this the early adopters going to have some cash in the bank?
Well, the primary study done by DOER studies single family homes in Worcester of small and medium sizes. And on the medium sized one, I think a 4-bedroom home in Worcester, the study shows that it's $20,500 cheaper to build it all electric. And that's because you don't pipe gas from the street, and you don't also run electricity. You have one system for heating and cooling. The home's well insulated, so that system works efficiently. And so that's better. And then it costs $548 less per year to operate versus a new gas home built similarly. So I think that is better for everyone.
Yeah, and you're right on, Nick, in terms of, imagine, you have a house that only has one type of utility bill, just an electricity bill, and not an electricity bill and a gas bill, right? And so even if you didn't use hardly any gas, you're still paying $10 a month just for the ability to have that account. And imagine if you're all electric, you don't, it's like you're saving that money right away. So it is, there's lots of reasons why it's better for residents at all levels. And the other thing I'd say in terms of who is it for? I mean, I think the proof is in the pudding, if you will, in terms of the types of the communities that have adopted it already, right? It's not just Lexington and Weston, and it's Boston and Cambridge and Somerville and
Worcester.
you know, what's that?
And Worcester.
Worcester, yes, thank you. I mean, Dylan, you know, please do speak up here. Please do speak up. But it's a lot of communities. It's going to be like Dylan, I think you said maybe perhaps Medford pretty soon.
Yes.
I mean, it's, you know, and I'm not. Anyway, it's all types of communities in our state. So I think it's better from you know, a health perspective, a resilience perspective, a long-term, you know, sort of cost of utilities perspective, which are all very, very important things to everybody.
Yeah. And like I would jump on like what Cindy is saying, that, you know, the 25 so far that we're seeing, yes, these are municipalities that tend to be more resourced in terms of their environmental or their planning staff, or they have a very dedicated environmental and sustainability committee. However, these are also there's diversity between these municipalities, and there's diversity within these municipalities. They don't exist in bubbles. They are there are pockets of neighborhoods where there is you know, high proportion of low-income residents or a high propensity of affordable housing. And one of the beauties of the specialized stretch code, or the incentives that are on offer from Mass Save and from IRA, is that, and I think Nick kind of pointed to this, you can build a lot of multifamily housing cheaper and with lower operating costs. And we're seeing examples of these. I think we're seeing a lot more examples in the recent past. And there are additional tax incentives through the low income housing tax credit, through the greenhouse gas reduction fund. There's so many federal and state initiatives that are going on, and Boston has actually done a really good job of mixing everything that is possible together to increase the supply of affordable housing that is also passive house.
Yeah, I see a number of questions about cost. I think we've hit a lot of them, if not all of them, but there's, I guess, some of that concern that especially multifamily housing or whatever could end up being more expensive to build, and therefore we'll get less housing when we really need it. But I guess what you're saying is it shouldn't be more expensive to build, is what I'm hearing. And also as a tenant, if you're living in an apartment, you know, how much of the any savings would be actually passed on to you as opposed to the landlord. But I guess that's a economic question, correct?
That's an economic and a policy question. Yeah, with split incentives. But yeah, and even without the federal tax credits or the state rebates, it's sometimes it is cheaper to build all electric versus gas, a gas base code building, just because you're operating an all-in-one electric solution for heating and cooling, so you don't need a separate one. And which means you can also, by building more a thermally tight envelope, you can size down your heating and cooling equipment. And because there's a slightly higher HERS threshold, yeah, there's a high HERS threshold for electric, you can actually get away with having less thermally efficient windows. And windows are a very expensive part of a building. So you can actually get away with having cheaper windows with an all electric building.
Interesting. Okay, you can all see the questions that have been coming in. Are there any ones that you've seen that you would like to answer directly?
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate, I sort of scanned through them, but I wanted to emphasize what Dylan just said at the end there, where, especially when you're thinking about costs, right? When you're, and again, this is really, it has nothing to do with the specialized code, because the specialized code can allow you to build all electric, or you can build with fossil fuels. But if we're talking about the benefits, or you know, the cost of building all electric, in most, I think it's fair to say, in every new home construction these days, it's built with air conditioning, right? So you have a heating system and you have an air conditioning, and they're two separate systems, right? And when you and you have to, and if your heating is fossil fuel based, then you have to put in all of those fossil fuel lines, and perhaps bury lines to the street, or bury a propane tank, or you know, all of those things. So when you build an all electric house, first of all, your heating and cooling system is one system, right? So it's one system that you're paying for, one system that you're maintaining, and you're not having to do all of that other pipe fitting work. And you're also, and those that system together, it doesn't use any more electricity. You don't need a bigger panel. Like if you're already putting a bigger electrical panel, if you're already putting an AC in, the power use of these, especially air source heat pumps. I don't have as much experience with geothermal or ground source. Of course, they're much more efficient. They're much cheaper to run. But there's the upfront cost of doing the drilling, et cetera. But they use very, very little power. And so there's really, you're not adding in terms of all of the other things of getting this house together. You're really, you're saving a lot in terms of the work that needs to be done to put these in.
Okay, yeah, thank you. It's almost a good summary of this session. So when Metrowest Climate Solutions was founded 4 years ago, the philosophy was having talks about how individuals, how we as homeowners, as residents of our community, could reduce our carbon footprint. And clearly, as you've all pointed out, housing is a big one. And you know, how along with how our transportation uses. So this is really critical if we want to get to net zero, if we want to individually reduce our carbon footprint, is what do we do on our homes? And thank you very much, all three of you, for helping us with this. And we're talking here largely about policy decision, right? How we can move our town to make decisions that will help us all. So I hope we all get out to vote and support any efforts to make our homes more efficient. Even our kids' homes, our grandchildren's homes more efficient, even if it's like some of us living in a 150-year-old house. Okay, any final comments or thoughts before we close this out that you've wanted to say and haven't been able to?
Thank you, everyone, for listening and attending.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for asking me. And it was a pleasure to be involved and to meet some new people doing the similar type of work. Nick and all of you in Weston, I think that you're in good hands. I mean, you know, it looks like you've done the work, you've done the outreach, and you know, adopting the specialized code is something. The specialized code itself is something, it's very elegant, it's very simple, and it's a very easy, you know, step towards in the right direction. And I appreciate Dylan and DOE's work for putting it together. So thank you.
Thank you, all three.
Thank you, everyone.
Until next time.
Good night.
Good night.
Night.